Renaissance. We're going to get to know his poetry, his thoughts on poetry and writing and our movement. Reb Kittredge, it is so great to have you here, sir. Say hello to the audience.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
And back with us again, the mighty Nullis, my co-host and friend and creator of Conversations with the Wind. How are you, sir, Nullis?
I'm doing well. Hello, Donald. Hello, Reb. And hello to the audience.
Brilliant, brilliant. Quick, do you want to give the audience a quick notification on when Conversations with the Wind will be back up?
Absolutely. Conversations with the Wind is tentatively scheduled for Sunday, November 7th at 8 p.m. And every continuing episode or subsequent episode would be every 2 weeks after in general. So November 7th at 8 p.m., which is a Sunday.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Reb Kittredge, it is wonderful to have you with us. Please give us a basic introduction to who you are and let us know a bit about the work you've done with American Renaissance. I want to first say American Renaissance is one of the top resources for everybody and anybody interested in learning about the white identity movement. I would say that is the starting point. There's many, many different shows and all kinds of books and publishers and various resources, but I always lead people directly to to American Renaissance first. And so tell us about yourself and your work.
Well, my most recent work was just a few minutes ago. I had to relocate my position here due to diversity. I was all happy in my office in there. I had books around me and the computer and iPad and all that. And the Mexicans started mowing the grass next door 20 minutes before dusk, and the weed eaters, the riding mowers, and then the ubiquitous leaf blowers came out. And I thought, well, okay, it's going to be a fight. It's very quiet where I live. And
really?
So I had to break camp and relocate here in my dining room, and so I'm now all set. And I'll talk about American Renaissance. In August of 2017, I read on a newsfeed the text of Hillary Clinton's speech denouncing the alt-right. And at that time, I did not know about that movement. I didn't know about any of the organizations or websites, and I was intrigued. I think that means that I was already receptive. There was already something latent in me. And in fact, in previous years, I had wondered, I could tell something pretty bad was going on. And I had wondered, is there any kind of pro-white organization that's not some, I guess what we would call now, white nationalist 101, something from the old days. I never could find anything like that. Well, anyway, so thanks to Hill, she mentioned Jared Taylor and American Renaissance, and a couple of others. And I went there and started reading, and I was intrigued. One of the first things I read was that the National Policy Institute, NPI, that at that time had a number of wonderful articles there. And one of the first things I read was Sam Francis's introduction to the book Race and the American Prospect, which is one of the best things you can read. Actually, I own the book now.
Right.
Wow, was that good? And so that was it. It was August of 2016. And I started reading these organizations and websites and educating myself. And frankly, I was already a race realist. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and my parents were racially conscious.
Okay.
I grew up during I was born in 1956. I was born into white America, and I can tell you that you would have to look at films, I think maybe from the 1930s and 40s to see what the country looked like back then. You just wouldn't believe how beautiful our cities were and how well ordered they were and how nicely everyone dressed, including black folks.
Sure.
It was a different world then, and I already knew about race, at least in regards to blacks and whites. My parents were extremely conservative. I guess you would call them the religious right before the Reagan Revolution.
Okay.
They were Christian anti-communists, okay? And they were race conscious. I've heard the John Birch Society criticized for not only not aiding, but actually blocking the way of people who were trying to do the good work at that time.
Wow.
I've heard Sam Dixon say this, for example, but that was not true of my parents. I can tell you that. And so that was just assumed. There was no question about that. I guess that I just didn't think about it for a long time, especially once I went to graduate school to study philosophy. I didn't really think about this kind of thing. I wasn't aware of that the trouble brewing was as great as it was.
Sure.
And so I guess I was dormant for a long time, except that once I got a university teaching position, even kind of middling universities have pretty good speaker programs, invited speakers. And so the top level of our administration sent circulars around announcing that Michael Levin, professor of philosophy at CUNY, City University of New York, was going to give a public lecture there at our university. Hey. And it was on freedom of inquiry. I thought, oh, well, Michael Levin. I had read his Metaphysics and the Mind-Body Problem in graduate school. He's a great philosopher. He really is a top-notch analytic philosopher. And I had read that in a graduate seminar. I thought, wow, Michael Levin's coming to talk about kind of an ethics or a political philosophy topic. So I was asked to be a panelist for that discussion. Wow. And when I accepted, the administration sent around a very large packet of materials, which were transcripts of the court case in which Professor Levin had to sue the university for infringing on his academic freedom because of, I don't know, a couple of editorials he wrote for the New York Times. And so they went after him. You probably know about this, or your readers may know about it. I'm sure that you can find them in the pages of American Renaissance. And of course, he was a speaker at American Renaissance for their first 4 conferences, starting back in the 1994 maybe. And so it was around then that he came to my university campus. But I didn't know about American Renaissance at that time. There was nothing in the court transcripts about any of that, nor had he published his fabulous book, Why Race Matters.
Yeah.
And his talk really was just about freedom of inquiry. However, I read the transcripts and I saw what prompted it. I saw that he had been attacked there at the university. And since I knew his work, he was very friendly. And so I chatted with him and actually wrote him a letter, which he answered. We had an exchange, and it was mostly about philosophical topics. But I believe that he did mention in there some people that he had been corresponding with. And I took it that they were, I think it was Philippe Rushton and people like that. And I gathered that he was preparing a manuscript. And, you know, that then it just went forgotten for a long time. I mean, really a very long time, maybe 20 years or something like that. I was doing other things. And so then when I started reading American Renaissance and started watching the videos of the conferences, there's Michael Levin. I know him.
Cool.
Wow. You know, cool. And then, so then I became aware because he hadn't mentioned the book to me. And I got a hold of the book and read it. What a great book that is. I mean, that really is at such a high level of analytical expertise. It really is a tour de force. It's just fantastic.
Let me jump in real fast.
Sure.
For people who don't have time to read the books, there's many good lectures at American Renaissance. And right now, American Renaissance is at odyssey.com. It's an alternative to YouTube. I believe they got kicked off of YouTube.
They did.
odyssee.com. It's a fabulous new free speech platform. They're probably on gab.com, which has been doing great recently. But I just need people to know this. It's extremely important to get more of our people to this information. So I apologize for cutting you off.
That's okay. It's a good thing for everyone to know. Well, so several years transpired, and I was reading our websites, really getting into them, and in the fall of 2019, I think it was, and I was retired by then. American Renaissance started this how I became conscious of race, their red pilling series in which readers write their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were soliciting from readers to send them just a kind of a précis as to a couple of paragraphs, and then they would judge which ones they wanted to put up. So quite a few months went by, and I heard from someone there and said that they liked mine a great deal and thought that it should be greatly expanded. And would I consider working on it and really developing it? And length wasn't really a problem. And they would make it into a featured article, not just one of the reader short articles, but one of the featured articles.
Great.
I said, oh, well, yes, my goodness, I'd be delighted. I mean, there were so many things in there. There was Birmingham, there was Miami, there were all these different cities. There was, my family background, which was interesting, and then there was the fortuitous meeting with Professor Levin. So that was there were just too many good things there, not to develop that story. And I had a great time writing it. And they're so professional. They're such nice folks at American Renaissance.
Yeah, very, very.
And I sent it to them, and up it went. And there it is right there with Governor Wild. I'm sure they thought, well, gee, this is perfect because he's from Birmingham and he grew up during that time. And I thought it was some perfect images that they put up. So that was the start. There was that article, and then I guess it was earlier this year. I've been through. No, it was last year, wasn't it? That they put up a poem that somebody wrote, and I wrote the person there that I know the best, and I said, "Oh, you've really opened the floodgates now. Okay, you're going to be sorry. You're going to get inundated." And as a matter of fact, I'm sending you something because I had written several dissident poems that would never find their way into any kind of mainstream literary magazine. They just came out. I didn't sit down and intend to write something like that, but out they came, and I thought, well, goodness, maybe they can find a home. Yeah. And so one thing led to another, and they did put up a couple of them. One that was titled "Gift," and that had been sitting around for a couple of years, as a matter of fact. And then I thought, well, then there was one that I had I keep a lot of little, I think of them as sketch pads, and so I pulled one out, and I thought maybe I could do something with it. It had been so long since I started that sketch that my perspective had been freshened, and bam, out it came. I saw a place where it could go, so I finished it and sent it in. And it's funny because they replied and they said, "You were so right. Okay, we are inundated, and we're going to wait a couple of weeks before we put yours up because we don't want to encourage a flood." And now you see the literary magazines. They're all of them are so backed up. That's why they might take 6 months to reply to you. Wow. The sheer volume.
Yeah, that's good news, though. That says that the American Renaissance is enormous and it's got a lot of attention.
Oh, absolutely.
And that there's so many people out there that want to contribute and have content. I wanted to ask you if you could describe yourself as a writer concisely. Like, what is it that you do? What's your academic background in teaching, and how does it all connect?
Well, when I was an undergraduate, I was aimless. I didn't really have any interest. My interests in high school were 100% in music. Singing, choral, as a matter of fact. I was in the men's glee club, the mixed ensemble, the choir. I was in musicals. I was in state competitions as a soloist. Wow. That was my life. Everyone in my family is a singer, truly. And then I really should have gone to college in music, and I didn't. I went to the big state university because that's where all my friends were going. A bad idea, okay? I just really wasn't mature enough, I think. And again, I didn't have an interest. There wasn't some subject that I was interested in. And that didn't go terribly well. I had a good time. Okay. Well,
Okay.
I came back with my tail between my legs. Okay, I was a bad dog, and I moved back home and just started working. I got a job and started working. And then it wasn't too long before I started going to the urban campus of said state university, which I liked a lot. It was the neatest part of town. It's kind of an alternative downtown. It was really cool, beautiful area over there. I just loved it. I really did. I had friends that lived over there. And again, I was lost for a while. And one semester, I took Introduction to Philosophy and Introduction to Poetry because my academic advisor told me that I needed some humanities credits or liberal arts credits. And she recommended both of those professors. And that's what changed my life. Okay. Right then and there. I mean, I think the first day of Introduction to Philosophy, and it's a credit to the professor, it was so good. I realized that it wasn't discovery so much as recognition. Oh, this is the kind of thing that I'd always been thinking about in some inchoate fashion without really knowing it. Metaphysical questions about personal identity. Like, wow, okay, we're going to talk about that kind of stuff? Well, I had no idea. And so I loved it. I ended up changing majors from business to philosophy, and I had a minor in English. The Introduction to Poetry course was just great. It was fantastic, but I didn't do anything with it for a very long time. Nevertheless, I did develop an interest in poetry, and through all of my moves over the years, I carried around a volume of Wallace Stevens. It's called The Palm at the End of the Mind. It's the selected poems of Wallace Stevens, compiled by his daughter, Holly Stevens. I've always loved that book. Actually, just this year, had to get a new one. The other one was simply falling apart. It had tape all over it. So I carried that with me all these years, as well as a volume of John Donne's poetry. I love John Donne. And then lo and behold, here I am working in an academic position as a philosophy professor. And that was my teaching. I worked there for 33 years at the same university. And between graduate school and my full-time position at the university, I was an adjunct instructor at several universities around South Florida and taught all over the place. I taught courses at the Miami Police Department, the Miami Beach Police Department, Eastern Airlines. It was so long ago, Eastern Airlines existed. FPNL, places like that, as well as on the regular campuses. That's really, and I was a teaching assistant in graduate schools. That's about 40 years.
How did you get into poetry then from teaching philosophy?
Well, here's what happened. In the late 1990s, I would say it's about, maybe it was the summer of 1998. I was home in my hometown, and my father had died while I was in graduate school. But my mother still lived there, thanks. And I was home doing some work on her house and so forth. And I found that the activity of painting, and some light carpentry, where your hand's busy and your mind is freed up, all of a sudden, just out of the blue, several poems came to mind. They insisted that I write them down. Like, I think there's something really taking shape there. I hadn't written poems before, so I wrote them down, and returned to South Florida in my work life down there. And someone came onto the staff in the writing to head the writing program, and he was a published poet. He had gone through one of the programs in Mississippi. It wasn't University of Mississippi. I think it was Southern Mississippi. He was a very nice guy too, and a musician. And so we were sort of palling around. I said, I really hate to ask you this. I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but I actually wrote a couple of poems, and I really don't know anything about it. Would you possibly take a look at them? He said, yeah, sure, no problem. Really? Okay. So I gave them to him. And so the next time I saw him, I said, well, so, what do you think? He said, good. I said, really? Really? He said, yep. Wow.
All right. Well,
good enough to to do something about it? And he said, yes. All right. So it was off to the races. What do I do? And I wasn't going to give up my job and go back to school.
Yeah.
That's not a STEM subject. Okay. You're not going to get a job doing that.
Yeah. Right.
And I started finding out about the low residency Master of Fine Arts MFA programs in creative writing, of which there were only 4 or 5 at the time. The best ones were Bennington College in Vermont. There were 2 others in Vermont as well. And then there was Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina. I think that was the most difficult one to get in, the most prestigious one. And actually, I didn't get in it. I got into one of the Vermont programs, though. And what a great experience it was to leave hot South Florida and go to Vermont. And so the way that it worked is that there was a summer residency of 11 days in late June and early July. And then there was a winter residency that started in late December and went through early January. And in the interim, you were assigned a faculty advisor with whom you corresponded in a really old-timey correspondence approach. Yeah. And every month, you would send in a packet of both new poems and revised poems and critical essays on books that you had been assigned. So you would read, there would be some books of poems, and there was always some kind of craft book. And so you had to write critical essays about poems and taking up topics in poetry, as well as producing your own creative work. And it really is one of the best things that I've ever done for myself. It wasn't cheap either, I can tell you. It was not cheap.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You mean the craft of writing poetry?
Exactly. That's what it's all about. That's right. Did
you end up teaching that or integrating any of this into your academic work later?
No, it had nothing to do with my day job. Nothing whatsoever to do. Okay. It really didn't. Now, a couple of articles that I ended up publishing actually I did find things that made their way into those articles. And I think it did improve my writing overall, even my prose writing. It just made me a lot more aware of language qua language. So I think it turned me into a better writer and a better reader as well. So I did that, and that was my little getting away life in the little poetry island there in Vermont. And I made friends there that I still have.
Nice.
And I wrote when I could, but remember, I was working at a place where there was a heavy teaching load, and teaching is the least of it. There's grading a lot of exams, there's going to all these silly meetings, and it was just exhausting. But I did the best I can, but it takes a long time to get good. I remember one day eating lunch that our graduating semester in 2003, and one of the writers asked one of the faculty members, "How long would you say it takes after we graduate before we can reasonably expect to be producing good work, good proficient work, and having some success?" And I noticed that she hesitated for a rather long time before answering.
Wow.
She didn't have a ready answer, and she said, 5 years.
Oh, wow.
I would say 15.
Oh, dear.
I think she was thinking 15. 15 if at all. Okay.
She didn't want to scare you, I guess.
Exactly.
You know what? We do have actually a question from the chat. And I don't normally do this, but I think this is an excellent question. Let me pop it on the screen real quick here. Have you ever read poetry from Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, or Clark Ashton Smith? And if so, what do you think of them?
H.P. Lovecraft. Yes, indeed. That's wonderful. In fact, I have one. I don't think I can get to my screen here without cutting us off. But there's one I keep on my screen about it's against wishful thinking, and it says that I planned for trouble, and so I was ready when trouble came. And I also know another one that Mr. Lovecraft wrote that's with a rather infamous title. That's one of the funniest things that I've ever read. But of those three, I think really I've only read Lovecraft.
And I wanted to pass the mic real quick to Nullis for any questions or responses.
Well, I just enjoying this conversation. I felt like I was a guest. I mean, the audience right now. I mean, this was phenomenal.
That's because I'm talking too much.
No. That's why I'm enjoying it. I just wanted to add just a few interesting notes that I made. When you spoke about the way it used to be, as funny as it might sound, it did inspire a title for a poem that that maybe the America we lost, and something along those lines. So now I have a title in my head. Now I have to write it out. So thank you very much.
Good. I hope to inspire others. Maybe that's my work, is to get others to work.
There you go.
I'm the overseer.
That's the best approach. I mean, that's and I really do believe that there was a time in the past. I mean, I'm not much younger, but somewhat younger. But I feel 30 years younger, of course. But all jokes aside, I do remember a time when I was young that where I lived, it was a stronger sense of community. You had a stronger sense of understanding of identity. You had a stronger sense of understanding those that belonged to your group and those that didn't belong to your group. So there was a much, and I grew up in a very, in a big city. So, for me, even in a big city, you felt it and you understood it, and everybody understood it. And the cities were much more, I mean, not all over, of course, I mean, in every big city, even in the 70s, late 70s, late 60s, early 70s, you had a lot of problems, a lot of decay. It started in the 60s. But still, you had that in most, I would say, in the majority of the areas, you would have a stronger sense of order and community. And a lot of that has disintegrated over the last 30, 40 years. And I've seen it. And I grew up watching this, witnessing this, seeing how entire neighborhoods transform into something unrecognizable. And so and in academia, you see this too. I would say that when I was in college and in graduate school, a lot of these issues were, how should I put it? I wouldn't say non-issues, but they weren't central issues. So, the question of race, the question of identity, the question of morality, were all academic, theoretical discussions that people would have with each other. There was an open debate. There was room for disagreement, even disputes. But today, it's just gotten so volatile that you can't even have an honest debate anymore. And so anyone who's questioning whatever official narrative is being pumped out is relegated to some kind of basement. I think, what is that, Office Space? The guy that's
I sure do know that. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and I kind of feel like that guy is kind of fired, but he didn't realize he's fired.
Oh, yeah, with the red stapler, Milton.
Yeah, Milton. Yeah.
I'm gonna burn the place down.
So, Reb, let me ask you a question. You when you were published in American Renaissance, they were using the title "Race Realism Isn't Enough." Could you expand on that, and what was that about exactly?
Yes, because I was a race realist already. I was born into it, and then reading Michael Levin's, I thought, oh, okay, well, it's confirmed. Okay, we've got that taken care of. But I was not awakened to the reality that we face now, to the threat that we had, because the missing ingredient, why race realism wasn't enough, the missing ingredient was identity, white identity, white consciousness, white solidarity.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I got from the pages of American Renaissance. And in particular, Jared Taylor's videos. I really connected with his videos.
Me too.
So it's just talking about, a creepy fan. Oh, he's talking to me.
I mean, he's phenomenal.
He really got through to me. Because I think there's something odd about white racial consciousness. And after reading Mr. Taylor's book, White Identity, you see that the other races have a very strong sense. We have the weakest one. Our little pilot light is burning pretty low under the best of circumstances, because I think we just assume it. We did for a long time. People just assume, our founders assume, well, it's a white country. We're around other white people. You don't really think about yourself, except in contradistinction to others. In other words, our identity is transparent. And so that leads to terrible problems. We think everybody's like us.
Yeah.
Oh, they're like us, Well, that's the problem right there. No, they're not. It's like, there's a famous article in philosophy by Thomas Nagel called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" And it's an article in the philosophy of mind. It's about consciousness, that he's defending the reality of consciousness against materialist attacks.
Okay.
And so I've thought about that question, is white identity, is it a set of dispositions or beliefs? Because that's the way that Jared Taylor tends to talk about it in terms of having beliefs or feeling racial solidarity, or is it like something? I think once you get over this transparency nonsense, it's like something to be white. We just never focus on. We never look in the mirror at our own white consciousness. I think it is like something, but I think that's part of our beauty, is that this transparency. This makes us discoverers and creators. Our own nature doesn't cloud our thinking. We can make impartial calls, okay, in courtrooms or on sporting fields. We don't make the call that we think is going to better us. We can actually make an impartial call. Well, anyway, so I'm going a bit far afield there, but the missing ingredient, the reason why race realism wasn't enough, is that I needed the positive thesis of white identity. Okay? There's a real white, it's not just that there are racial differences in intelligence and temperament and things like that. It's identity. Identity was it for me. That's what did it. Okay? That's what got me off the couch, so to speak, in my thinking about these problems. That was the missing ingredient. That's what I got at American Renaissance.
Powerful, powerful. So speaking of a group that has very strong racial identity, we're going to look at a very famous, or what I would call infamous, poem by Allen Ginsberg. We're not actually going to read it or look at it, but we're going to talk a little bit about it in relationship to a poem that you wrote that was a response to that. In the poetry world, Allen Ginsberg and the beatniks, and that scene was a very major or very popular kind of scene in sort of the 50s and the 60s in American history. And you can imagine, what that entails. So there's a lot, like homosexuality, communism, blah, blah, blah. You can fill in all the blanks. It's just what you might think it is. But I'm going to pass it over to you, Reb, to discuss about Howl, the poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg, and then your reaction to it.
Well, sure. Well, I didn't, by the way, there is a great writing exercise in poetry, and people should do these. I mean, you really, to understand poetry, to be able to write it, even to criticize it well, you have to come from the inside of it. You have to learn how to do it. You have to learn poetry from the writer's perspective, how to create those effects. Okay. Now, having said that, so one of the writing exercises is called write the opposite. You pick a poem, any poem, and write the opposite. Now, it doesn't have to be the opposite in terms of point of view. It can be the opposite in tone. It can be the opposite in diction, in rhythm, anything. So you have something to play off of. So in a way, this was a writing the opposite. And frankly, I didn't even reread Howl. It's repulsive to me. I had read it, I think, in college.
Sure.
I remembered it well. I know what it is, and I didn't have to look at it to know what I thought, what my contribution would be for our Howl.
Okay, so this is a reaction to Howl. That's sort of the Howl of our people per se.
That's right. It doesn't answer him. I mean, it's really, there's the only reference to that poem is in the title. Now, there are other poems, however, that really do find their way in here, and they are the following. First of all, Wallace Stevens' poem, The Snowman, which really is a brilliant short lyric poem. There is a place in here. See, if you know good poets, then when you're writing something, these things will pop in there. They'll come up in your consciousness. You don't have to do research the way that you're doing when you write an essay. So Wallace Stevens' poem, The Snowman, as I was writing kind of a automatic writing, that's the way I wrote this, almost like the way they wrote, okay, like on the road, you know, at one sitting apparently on speed, he wrote that.
Yeah.
And I remember something famous that Truman Capote said, another great Alabamian. He said, "That's not writing, that's typing."
In that exact accent.
He's a great writer. Truman Capote is a great writer.
Right.
Well, anyway, so these things kept cropping up as I was writing. Like, oh, here's a little Wallace Stevens moment here. And then here's a Robert Creeley. He was in a group known as the Black Mountain Poets of North Carolina. His famous, very intensely enjambed poem called "I Know a Man." And so there's some stuff kind of directly from those two poems in there. And then at one point in my rant, I found a place for, there's a famous American poet named John Berryman who wrote really a cycle called The Dream Songs, and they have different persona in them, different characters. And so I found a place for that too.
Well, let me back up a little bit for the sake of the audience. Could you give a description of the poem Howl so that they know what it's about and what you're responding to?
It is quite a lengthy poem,
right?
In which he begins by proclaiming that he's seen the best minds of his generation ruined by drugs and degeneracy and all this stuff, and then he proceeds to wallow in it and to go into some kind of Jewish mystical fit in a way.
Yes, and
it really is in some way. I mean, I think there were much better poets. They actually did have some good poets, but I think it's a shame. Well, the reason why he became such a cause célèbre, and that poem did, is because it occasioned a free speech trial. The book was proclaimed obscene. Yeah. Now, see, that's when the left defended freedom of speech. When the authorities acted against their interests. Of course, they don't do it now that they're in power. Of course, they don't.
Right, they put their people in power, so they don't have that problem anymore.
Exactly. And so at that time, and until very recently, if you study First Amendment law, the First Amendment is a very absolute sounding statement. Okay, but there has evolved I used to teach philosophy of law, and we went into this a lot. Wow. There has evolved a judicial doctrine of categories of unprotected speech. And so you could say, well, this is judge-made law. But if you have something as general and vague, and I think that's actually a strength of our Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and in particular, the First Amendment, you can imagine sometimes when speech might not be permissible. And of course, the classic example is falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater. You cause a stampede. Right. And that actually was, that language occurs in the Supreme Court decision. And so there were these categories of unprotected speech. And basically what that turned into was incitement versus advocacy. Incitement was not protected speech. However, many, many more cases came before the court, and the court consistently ruled that offense is not a justifiable legal reason for prohibiting speech. And so it never is the case that the content of speech alone is justification for prohibiting it. Okay. Now, I would say the most controversial category of in the judicial doctrine of unprotected speech is obscenity. And we can argue about that, whether that's legitimate or not. Well, Howell was condemned as obscene because of sex acts depicted as well as language. And this came out during the 1950s. I think it actually first appeared in 1955. And of course, it's the City Lights bookstore in North Beach in San Francisco, of course, which was the heart of that movement. And, that was really a great neighborhood up until maybe 10 years ago. And it's not so great anymore. Yeah. Okay. They have been blessed by diversity so much in San Francisco that it is just, that used to be my favorite city. I went there a couple of dozen times between the late 70s into the 2000s. And the last couple of times I went, I thought, I don't, this isn't fun anymore. Okay. I'm glad I saw it when I did. I'm glad I hung out in Manhattan after Giuliani cleaned it up. Okay. I'd better just preserve those memories and let that be it. So anyway, this was their big, piece of writing that bespoke their movement, and they were persecuted by the authorities, and there was a free speech trial. And a lot of people were motivated by his example to push the limits, so to speak, and test the limits. And so I thought, well, gee, that's really yesteryear, isn't it? I mean, that was old and dusty. I think even by the late 60s, that kind of thing. It was replaced by music and a lot of really genuinely good poets. There were some really genuinely good poets out there.
Lawrence Ferlinghetti is one of my favorites. But yeah,
what's that?
Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
Oh yeah, Ferling. There's a great bar called like the Ferlinghetti Bar or something, right? Yeah. As you walk toward the Transamerica Tower from City Lights, there's a cool double-decker bar there. I think it's called.
I always thought his poetry just embodied the spirit of jazz rather than some kind of weird degenerate sort of communist garbage, and all that. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, hell is really the pits. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of
let's segue into your poem that is the response to that. Then what is
sure?
Okay.
So much of poetry from the turn of the 20th century on, the writtenness is so essential to it, rather than just the sound, the way it's arranged on the page, the line breaks, the use of white space, and so forth. So none of that will come through, but sure. I'll try to do a decent job. Most poets are terrible reading their poetry, which is a shame. That should be addressed. And maybe I'm not quite as bad as many of them. So it's a couple of pages, and I will proceed to read it now. And I don't know why, but for some reason, other poets became the person I was addressing in here, in a way. That just took shape in the writing of it.
Okay.
So here we go. Howl 2. You poets love your solitude, some little nook where you can hear yourself, think, imagine, gaze out the window. Let the nuts and bolts, nouns and verbs and images knock around inside your brain house. Summon the muse. Oh, don't praise the Greeks. But what happens when the rap music rattles your window panes? When Bryce Canyon has red swollen eyes, ringing ears from the rumbling boom boxes of Hispanics and blacks who find nothing that represents them, swept there on the escalator of progressive programs you hoard for. When every standard, and you thought they were universal, but guess what? They were white, is shattered. What then? Or when your goddamn big car gets carjacked because you're always talking as the darkness surrounds us. Or when there's a home invasion robbery, when the black cancer claims yet another neighborhood, yours this time. Come on down. Maybe when a Muslim throws acid in your face, or some POC calls you a white privileged bitch, your writing will improve. You'll have material, a POV, or rapes your daughter, or your son, or shoots your house up with a gun. What in the world then? Maybe the nothing that is there? You love the other. Well, just wait until the other whips out his or her blade. Let's see how you wear your cherished label minority. How generous the other is to you, Ms. Ally, you pussy hat wearing flotsam. You recite the catechism. Western Civ is white supremacist. So elegy, the longed for absent, is your stock in trade? Lament this then, white extinction. You birth up poems, let white babies die in the dungeon of possibility. You ain't gwine to ax no one, Moloch. Says what, Mr. Bones? Who will write for bloody you then? And the men you decry, who'll defend you? Your men? Those cucks, those pansy freaks, those virtue signaling snowflake NPCs, those backwards turned flat brim baseball cap wearing wiggers, or one of those LGBTQIAPKBS infinitely expanding pretentious personas that your little shop of horrors fabricates? Who then? How do you like the howl so far of this dispossessed, cis-normal, heterosexual, unreconstructed Southern with a capital S, identitarian, alt-right, white nationalist, WASP man? Name one thing in here that's not true. Name one other country besides a white ethno-masochist state of despair that would tolerate the sorry, hypocritical likes of you. That is your writing assignment. Get back to me when you're done.
Wow. Let's let Nellis go first in terms of response.
Well, I mean, I had to lie back. I mean, sort of lean back and listen, close my eyes and listen to it.
That's what I did.
It's like a loud boombox, isn't it? It's just, well, okay, they're screaming at us. I felt like screaming back.
Right.
It encapsulates everything. And it's just such a, I mean, you know, it's great. I have to say it's one of those situations where when I was listening to it, then yes, this is exactly it. And I was feeling that you know, this is representative of that deep anger and frustration that people have with what's going on. Everything around them is changing into something bizarre and inverted, and so when you listen to this, then you know you understand that undercurrent of anger that most people, most white people in the U.S. and throughout Europe feel with what's going on. And I don't even know if it's most, but a very large number. I mean, maybe that would be a much better way of putting it. So I mean, bravo. This is all I have to say.
Well, thank you for the good words. Very, very much. I appreciate it. I tell you, I felt washed clean reading it just now, as I did when I finished writing it. It's getting that bile out.
Yeah. And,
you know, it's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to write your issues in poetry. And they told us that. Get some more of your of course, that wasn't going by Reb, but they would say, you know, get your X issues in there, your whatever issues, your issues, whatever your obsessions are. Well, they didn't mean it, did they? I mean, suppose this is my issue. Yeah. Oh, you're not gonna get this published anywhere. Oh, no. But they get to publish their version, just like they got to publish Hal. You should read the stuff. By the way, can I make just a little suggestion for everybody here?
Sure.
If you want to know what's going on, but you don't want to give these people money, all right, here's what you do. You subscribe to some free daily poetry sites, and you will see some of the best that's out there. And some of it will be really fantastic. And some of it will be explicitly anti-white, or maybe it's a really good poem up until a certain point.
Yeah. And
there they go. And if we wrote the equivalent of that, they would toss it in the trash can. So here are the ones that I want to recommend. First of all, one of the top literary magazines in the country is called Rattle, Rattle. Just go to the Rattle website. You can sign up, and they'll send you a poem a day. That's how you can start learning contemporary poetry. Okay, that's one way. Okay. There's another one, and this one used to be very good, Poetry Daily, where it would be a poem a day, and they were very, very good. I read it for many years. By the way, the website is rattle.com for Rattle Literary Magazine. The other one is Poetry Daily, and if you just type in poems.com, you'll get their poem a day. And there's another one. This is the Academy of American Poets. It's a big website. Okay, everybody's there. And it's poets.com. Just go there and see what they've put up. That'll probably be by somebody famous and big rather than
I'd like to see more of our people submitting to these.
Well, I think the thing to do is to submit to them.
Yeah.
Now, if you have, This that I wrote, there's no way.
Well,
There's
that's
no way.
part
Okay.
of what the White Art Collective and Imperium Art and our platforms are for. Thank God we at least have our own
Yes.
platforms. I did want to respond a bit also to your poem, if I may.
Sure.
There's a very natural continuity between you and the voice of you in the poem. I also like the unapologetic truth of it, the unbridled reality, and how you're able to take so much and put it in a poem that lasts just a few minutes. And our voices are stunted and silenced and cut off in the cultural war that we're our truth out, and our problems are these notions of all these things that we have in such a concise way, and it's also a way that is crafted in poetry, and there's some interesting sort of visuals involved in the way that it flows. It's a great thing. We need to hear that. We need more of that. There's so little representation of us, let alone our problems that are exclusively white problems, right? You're getting the general idea. So I just wanted to say, like, this is a good thing, and I hope that it acts as an inspiration to people watching the show. But also we've got other poetry of yours, The Gift and White is a Color. So would you like to read those as well?
If I can find them.
I'm going to put them on the screen.
I don't have a printer at home.
I'm going to put them on the screen in just a second.
I sent myself some emails earlier in case we.
Tell you what, I'll send you the link in the chat.
I'm going to read those for Conversations with the Wind.
Oh, are you? You want to do? Okay, why don't we save that for Conversations with the Wind?
Oh, that's right. I remember now.
That'd be much better. That's a good chance for us to segue into your reaction to the essay that Nullis wrote on Imperium art. So if you'd like to share some thoughts with us about how do you think about the Imperium art project?
Oh, well, I enjoyed reading that very much, and I think it's vitally important for us to craft responses to what's going on. I think it's part of the larger meta-political project that we have. We already have an elite that's so much better than their elite, so much better. They don't have anyone like Greg Johnson and Jared Taylor. And just think of the people that we've lost. Sam Francis, Philippe Rushton, Carlton Putnam. They don't have anyone like that. Who are they going to put on the stage with these people? Don Lemon, Hillary Clinton. I mean, they're a joke.
I know. They're some actors.
It's just astonishing.
Yeah.
But we haven't captured, let alone or infiltrated in any way the arts. And that's what we have to do. And so it's important to do things like this. I'm submitting to mainstream magazines. Most of it is just what I would write as a poet. It might not have anything to do with our issues. It might not. Most of what I write doesn't. However, I am getting around to answering your question. Okay. However, what I've noticed is that now that I've really had a sustained period of about 7 months here of being very productive, probably the longest such period that I've had. And what I'm noticing is that our identitarian stuff is creeping in rather subtle ways. Now, those might get in. If you can write something where it's a little ambiguous, what you're praising, what you're blaming, what you're extolling. And I have some of those right now that are out there that I have submitted, and I don't know what the response is going to be, except that I've had a fruitful year. I've had a couple of very good publications this year in mainstream magazines. Now, those poems were just regular normie poems, okay? But I've sent some stuff out that I think is more strongly insinuates and of course they pick up on everything. Surely they can tell. If one of those gets in, that's just going to encourage me to do it more. Okay. So back to the Imperium art essay. I think that is a really important thing to do. And if you subscribe to these poetry sites, you will see what's out there. You will see what's passing for good poetry. Now, I do have one slight difference of opinion here, and that is I think that aesthetics is sufficient for evaluating artworks. I don't think you really need separate moral criteria. And I'm inclined to think, as a philosopher, this is something that's occurred to me in recent years, that ethics might even be a subset of aesthetics. Okay? And I will assert this maxim here tonight, that when there is an ethical failure in a poem, there is also a failure of craft. Poetry is supposed to contribute to understanding. Now, you can lie in a poem. You can say that your father died or something, and he's alive and well and playing poker with his buddies. That factual truth doesn't matter, because and one of the first things we learned is that the first thing that you create when you're writing a poem is the speaker.
Yeah.
Who are you going to? Now, we know that race is not a social construct. People are born with a nature that has been genetically programmed. We have a self. We don't choose a self. That's nonsense.
Sir.
However, that does not apply to poetry. The word poetry comes from the Greek word poesis, which means making. It is 100% artificial. Now, there's a peculiar thing there, okay? Because when I'm in the grips of writing a poem that I know is working, it feels like something is flowing through me. It's the way that Stevie Ray Vaughan used to describe the music. It's just, it were flowing through him, flowing out from his. It does feel, that's the phenomenology, I think, of good poetry. But you can't aim directly at that. It happens when you work at the craft and work hard. And a lot of writing won't feel that way. And when it does, it really is a joyous thing. So I think that we have to come at poetry, both writing it and appreciating it and evaluating it and criticizing it from inside poetry itself. Unfortunately, there's just no good substitute for actually having formal instruction in it. We can't stand outside of it and criticize it or try to impose an ideological framework on it. That's just not how poetry gets written. It's written when there's something knocking around inside your head, an image you can't let go of.
Right.
When the sound and the image get married up, and you just have to go write it down. All right. Yeah. Now, having said that, criticizing poetry is part of poetry. It's part of it. We had to write critical essays every semester in addition to creative work. So what you're doing there is really important. Okay. And you've got great people that you're bouncing off. You're bouncing off of T.S. Eliot, one of the great modernists, along with Pound. And I know that we're not going to talk about it tonight. We're going to talk about it on Conversations with the Wind, but Pound's essay, there you go. You see, notice that he didn't say anything in there political. He didn't say anything. He said, keep that out. Don't use abstract. Don't say something as dim as peace. No, you can't do that. Okay. So one famous comment that William Carlos, he's one of my favorites, William Carlos Williams, a really great poet. He said, no thoughts, but in things. He didn't say no thoughts. He said no thoughts, but in things. Okay.
What does that mean?
You have to image out those more abstract things that you want to talk about.
I get you. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, here's a good example of a formal poem. I think that does that and makes that very point is Ars Poetica. That's a very beautiful poem, one that everyone should know. And Archibald MacLeish. Well, anyway, so I think it's good to criticize there's another thing I'd like to clear up here too. Okay. The speaker in the poem is not to be identified with the author or the poet. Okay.
It's just similar to a painting or music in a way, but I understand.
Right. Although the poem will have a point of view. The poem will have a point of view, and we ought to criticize when they're lying, and they lie all the time. Okay. We need to criticize that. We've got to become very familiar with what's being published right now, though, but the good, the bad, and the ugly, to be very, very effective. I think the overarching points that essay makes are right on. We've got to connect it up to really be effective, though, to the scene now. The difference between studying poetry from the point of view of the writer, which you never get in college, you'll never get that from an English professor, versus studying it from people who teach creative writing, okay, the perspective of the writer, how you make it happen. One of the differences in those two approaches is that you start with the contemporary. You start with what's happening right now. You read people, you don't start with Beowulf, you don't start with Chaucer, you don't start with the Iliad, although you will go back and you'll love them. But you start from the present and work back. It's a much better way to learn what the influences are. And I actually think that the United States in the 20th century is the best poetry country in the world.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
Wow.
How many great poets we've had. and I am getting back to the essay here, but I just want to say, including recent ones, I think probably the greatest poet since 1950 is Larry Levis, and I bet your listeners have never heard of him.
No.
What a great poet Larry Levis was. My God. I mean, the book that was posthumously published right after his death is called Elegy. That is some of the most darkly brilliant, visionary stuff ever written. Ever written. He is really great. So what you want to get is, first of all, there's a book called The Selected Levis, and you can see his development as a poet from his first couple of books to the later ones, where it really starts picking up in intensity. That's a great book, The Selected Levis. And then when you get through that, you want to get the slim volume Elegy. Wow. I mean, that is, the way that, and my instructor told me, this is a beautiful example of how you can switch back and how the voice operates in a poem, how you can switch from a kind of talky or descriptive mode into a more meditative mode. It really is astonishing. I'll tell you somebody else who's really good that you'd never dream of, James Dickey, who wrote the novel Deliverance, that the famous movie was made.
Okay.
Based on. In fact, he's in the movie. He's the sheriff at the end. That's James Dickey. James Dickey is a great poet. And what you want to get there is called Poems 1957 to 1967. They're difficult too. Wow. I mean, we have an embarrassment of riches here in this country. I don't know why that is, but it's us at our best. That really is an achievement. I think my favorite poets when I was in the MFA program were Larry Levis, and also a guy named Stephen Dobbins, who's still alive. And his book on the craft of poetry called Best Words, Best Order, that's a must read. That's where everybody should start. Just read that.
So can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
First of all, I think we have to mention what date that you will be on Conversations with the Wind, and so that the audience can mark that down. Nellis, do you know the date?
Yes, that episode will be the first episode of season 3.
Beautiful.
So we're gonna have Strix and Reb on together, and we are going to talk about creative writing with a focus on poetry. So I strongly recommend that everyone tune in. It'll be live on DLive. Well, it's going to be pre-recorded, but I'm going to air it on November 7th. And it's it'll be available on my YouTube channel shortly thereafter.
November 7th, mark your calendars. What Reb is talking about now, he can go into much greater detail in a show that actually is more specific on poetry too. So that is I just can't wait for that. That'll be fantastic. I do want to try to steer it back towards the points of the Imperium Art essay. Yes. Maybe Nellis could do a little refresher on a couple points, and then we can kind of go from there.
Well, maybe the best way to approach it is to go through each element in the essay and maybe get Reb's response to each one of those elements, and then we could take it from there. So the first element is the repositioning of the soul of the European man in Imperium art. So that passage, what were your thoughts on that?
Can you explain a little bit what that means?
So what I'm really trying to get at here is saying that there has been, at least in my view, and again, this is a very careful way of approaching this topic. I personally believe that the Enlightenment, humanism, the Enlightenment, ultimately liberalism, led us toward a trajectory that brought us to where we are today. And that trajectory is a kind of a metaphysical tie, a cut from the metaphysical reality that we had before, that we expressed before. Maybe that's a good way to put it. And so the understanding of one's self outside of oneself in this divine context, it gets sort of lost in the materialism and the focus on the individual. So that's really where I'm getting at. And I'm trying to say that when we try to reposition the soul of the European man in Imperium art, we want to find ways that we can reconnect those ties without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of excellent art, poetry, music, visual arts. So, and even philosophy. So it's not saying that we want to just discard everything, although there could be an argument made for that as well, if you look at it from a futurist perspective. But you want to look at it as saying that if we're going to connect all our continuity, the entirety of our continuity, then we have to take the good with the bad. But we have to understand the context of what that good is, and we have to understand the context of the bad. And we also have to sort of find gems and diamonds in the rough in this whole process. And so when I'm saying what I personally believe, at least, is that in this day and age, through this I would say like maybe 2 centuries old trajectory, we've been gradually leaving our understanding of our metaphysical understanding of ourselves, of our connection to God, if you will. And so that's really what I'm trying to say, is I want to really reconnect that through Imperium art. Hope that makes sense.
Well said, and I agree. I certainly think that is the beautiful critique of the political trajectory, a trajectory of our undoing, really, over the last several centuries. I have a couple of issues with it. One is that it's of the very nature of lyric poetry that it speaks of the individual self. That we're stuck with that. I don't think there's any way to get around that unless you're going to write narrative poetry, and especially an epic. One thing I made sure that I did after retirement is I wanted to go back and read some of the great works of Western literature that I had only skimmed before and not read at all. So I read the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid. I reread Beowulf. Wow, it really is. You really need to get that in your brain, and because it will come out. Anything you read, you'll show the influence of what you read at some point. It might not happen for a long time. However, there is something intrinsic to lyric poetry that speaks of the individual's experiences. But you have to take those personal experiences and put them in a vehicle where they cause the same reaction to all readers at all times, as Philip Larkin, a great English poet, put it. I don't know. For some reason, our people have continued to write great, in fact, better and better poetry throughout the 19th and 20th centuries in the midst of this civilizational decline. I think, and I wouldn't want to burden lyric poetry with a particular worldview. For example, I am not a religious person. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's true. And I would ask what you mean by materialism. I mean, if you mean by, I'm a philosopher by training. If you mean an acquisitive, selfish, individualistic lifestyle or something like that, yes, that absolutely, okay, that's part of what got us here and is keeping us trapped where we are. But if you mean that as a metaphysical doctrine, that matter is the ultimate reality, I think that's probably true. And I think that consciousness exists. I think it's real. But we have never been confronted with any instances of consciousness that were not connected to material bodies. I think consciousnness is some kind of function of matter. So I would say that I have a naturalistic, materialistic outlook. And suppose that's true, just for the sake of argument. That's not preventing us from writing good poetry or symphonies.
Can I jump in real fast?
Yeah, sure.
Just throwing this in there. What if matter is a function of consciousness. Just you set that aside, and then for another time, another conversation.
Well, that's metaphysical idealism.
Yes. Well,
okay. Now, I'm one who would say that Greg Johnson has talked about what he calls sectarianism, burdening our movement with things that are not simply racial and ethnic identity and defense. For example, Christian beliefs or something like that. And I actually agree with that. If we formed an ethno state, we would have atheists, we would have theists, we would have people who have different views on a range of subjects, but white survival and flourishing, there would not be a range of views on. That would not be on the table. That's beyond politics.
I am going to have to push back on some of this. And I'm going to say, first of all, on the slight pushback, because as the Latin says, de gustibus non est disputandum, right? So we cannot argue about tastes. But I, as many in the audience might know, that my background is Hungarian. And so I grew up reading Hungarian poetry in Hungarian and even reciting it as a child and everything, all the great poets and what have you. And I would argue that the Hungarian poets, even though many of their poems are very difficult to translate, and even if they are translated, many of them are poor translations. You can't really transfer the soul of the poem in many cases. I mean, you have to be a poet yourself to be able to translate poetry. Incidentally, a lot of Hungarian poets were also translators. So that's another interesting topic. But suffice it to say, I would argue that the 19th and 20th century Hungarian poets were probably the best. And that's somebody who knows, speaks and reads and understands Hungarian fluently since childhood, and somebody who reads and understands and speaks English fluently from childhood. So my basis of comparison is the experience of the community, of the whole. And the American experience is a more individualistic experience. It's a more pioneer experience. It's a different kind of reality than that of, for example, the Hungarian. The Hungarian was fighting in the 19th century, for their independence, for their own freedom. In the 19th century, they were embracing the romantic ideals of nationalism. And in some cases, it was misconstrued. In other cases, it was very healthy and organic continuity from their already understanding of themselves from centuries before. There's a deep connection in Hungarian poetry to the ancient roots of the Hungarian culture. There's a very deep understanding of what it means to have a relationship with God. You have an entire genre, for example, in Hungarian poetry that are divine poems that are speaking to God, and it's basically the poet it's almost like a prayer in a way, but it's not. It's a hymn to God in a way that the reader can identify with it, because the reader feels the same thing. The reader understands that same reality. And so there's this unwritten reality. There's this unwritten cultural, racial, ethnic understanding of self that's translated through these poems. And I don't find that in American poetry. I find American poetry, and this is my critique actually of American poetry, I find American poetry to be very self-consuming, very, I would say in a way, and again, I'm trying to not say it, but in a way, I would say selfish in a way. And it flutters around, ideas of self. Now, don't misunderstand me, because I think that you have to express who you are through your poetry. You have to express your feelings, the way you feel. But here's where it gets interesting. If you have a connection to your greater community, if you have a connection to your identity and those layers of identity that you have of being, someone, of having a certain value system, of having a certain kind of faith, then that's all translated and it's expressed in that way. And so I would argue, in my personal opinion on this, that when I'm talking about reconnecting the soul, that's exactly what I'm talking about. In a sense, I'm saying that I believe, and I've seen it, I see it manifest in Hungarian poetry. I don't see it manifest in American poetry, for example, and I find it missing. In other words, it's something that I wish that we would see more of. Now, this is not political, mind you. I'm not trying to, say that we have to be explicitly political or explicitly, one way or the other. But by not expressing this, by avoiding this, we are denying ourselves a greater understanding of the greater community that we live in. So that's kind of where I'm trying to get with my personal position on it, and also where I'm coming from when I'm saying reconnecting the soul of the European man.
It's interesting. One of the important developments, especially during the 1960s, was a number of poets. They're usually associated with the deep image movement. In particular, Robert Bly really went on a campaign of translation of poets from other countries. Mm-hmm. And there were two emphases. One was South American poets. There were a number of important South American poets, and another was Eastern Europe, in particular Poland. And in fact, there's been just a kind of a flood of great poets from Poland, Czesław Miłosz being the most prominent. Wisława Szymborska is another one. Adam Zagajewski is another one. Had a tremendous impact. And so that is extremely important. And we were encouraged to work with translation. And in fact, one of our summer residences, which we normally had in Vermont, one of the faculty members had connections in Slovenia and knew the writers in that country. Oh, wow. And we had the option, and I took them up on it, to spend our summer residency in 2002 in Slovenia. And we were there at Lake Bled in perfectly beautiful surroundings. And we had our workshops and meetings and did our readings there. And we went around the country and met different poets and listened to them read their work. And it was a great experience. It truly was. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, that it's important to make contact with poets from other countries and in other languages. And you might see that that you're trapped in something that maybe looking at it from another point of view can help us enlarge our poetic vision as well. So I would agree with that 100%. I think that the question of big metaphysical theories, I think that's a philosophical issue. Those things can't be settled very, very quickly. I'm not a religious person, though, so that's not going to, although I have to say, I have had several poems where I think that I think maybe there was a religious sensibility that I kind of transferred onto the natural world in a couple of them. And in fact, one of them was published by a guy who was I think he was an Episcopalian bishop and was also a prominent poet. And it's about a shell that I found, the crucifix shell, which I'll never forget finding this on the beach in Sarasota when I was a kid. It looks like a crucifix. I mean, it really does. I thought about this for so many years. And so when I was in the program, that came to mind, like, wow, and I just started writing stuff down, and that thing got published. That poem got published.
Nice.
But however, though, I mean, I'm not a religious person. That's just not a point of view that I will ever adopt. So I think that I don't want to saddle poetry with too much ideological baggage. It's you and the page.
Right. Okay? Well, it's a question of interpretation, right? So like, I don't look at religion as an ideology. I look at it as identity. So when you understand that as a part of yourself, then it's not ideology. So, but this is, but I just wanted to just quickly interject, and we're not here to, debate theology. I've always said that, I'm not a theological expert by any stretch of the imagination. I am religious. I am Catholic, so I do find that as an important part of who I am. But I don't, I don't try to, how should I say, dominate a conversation on that topic. So I respect your position on that, obviously. So I don't want you to feel that I'm trying to force it. I just wanted to provide a different point of view. And what I do want to say, though, is that what I do feel is happening right now in our spheres, specifically in our spheres, is a growing understanding of the greater community. is a growing understanding of the identity, the layers of identity. And I think that the American, especially in American literature, there really wasn't a need for a greater understanding of self, or a greater understanding of the or an understanding of the greater community in which one lives. And as we are under attack, as we are constantly being put into very awkward positions and threatening positions by others who wish us ill, people start then looking in terms of a community as opposed to an individual. And then when that starts to happen, then these common themes start to resurface, not necessarily in an ideological, overt manner, but it can be expressed in ways that might beckon to certain common understandings of this said identity. And I think that that's really what we're kind of going at, if you're asking me, in terms of at least the right wing moving in that direction culturally. But it's really phenomenal. I just wanted to add one thing about translation, and we can go into this on Conversations with the Wind, but I tried to translate Hungarian poems to English, and I find it an excellent exercise and a huge challenge, because you're trying to transfer the soul of a poem into a completely different language. And you know, you want to get the same rhythm, you want to get the same rhyme, you want to get the same message across, and it's very, very difficult. So it's a really good exercise. I'm sorry, Donald, please. I don't want to die.
No, I'm just trying to get the overview here on how this conversation plugs in with the Imperium Art Project. So,
well, this is the collaboration.
Oh yeah,
of the continuum. That's what I wanted. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'm just trying to get a more of a umbrella view.
Right. This is in the collaboration of the continuum through the Imperium. That's exactly what we're doing right now.
Yes.
We're having a conversation on understanding all of these different cultural milieus. You know, if you're going to talk about Poland, France, Germany, Hungary, the United States, England, all of these different cultures have different unique experiences, and we should grow from these unique experiences to be better as a greater whole. And I think that's really a part of what that aspect of the collaboration of the continuum is about. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, either one of you.
I think that this brings us back to the beginning of the show, where we're asking, how did we get in such a bad situation? And I think now, you know, okay, previously, specifically in America and certainly in Europe, we were, you know, ethnicities. You were French, German, Hungarian, Polish, Irish, Italian, and now we're white. And that doesn't obviously deny the reality of our ethnicities and our histories, etc. But we're in a whole new paradigm, but so few people have woken up to that yet. And the clock is ticking. We're almost in the 11th hour here, where people are, you know, in the mainstream, they're starting to use the term anti-white and the Great Replacement and these kinds of things. And people are just starting to stand up. And so what we're doing here on this show, and in this very show, in this conversation you two are having, we're laying the groundwork for the Imperium. We're saying, in the Imperium, there will be differences. There will be, you know, atheists, pagans, Christians, what have you. And this is an example of that here and now. So it's a good example of how we can have rational and healthy discussion with each other, coming from all these different perspectives, under the umbrella of whiteness and identity, white identity, in relation to the fact that white genocide is upon us. So that is obviously the most important thing, and that's reason enough and motivation enough and energy enough, fuel enough for us to work through these differences, to say we must come together, coalesce into an Imperium, and take back our destiny, our sovereignty.
Yeah, so, I would just add that we're not really looking at differences. I think the way we should look at this is growing and learning from each other, and not looking at it as differences, but looking at it as a variety of wealth that we have within our own spheres. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Tremendously.
And you know, I want to hear what, you know, Reb's poems are all about. I want to hear what his perspectives are about, because that helps me grow. And I hope that I can inspire him. And maybe if he writes another poem, maybe he might think about something that I mentioned, or maybe not. But the point is that we have it available, and that's that continuum that I'm trying to refer to in the essay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this has been a profound and fascinating conversation. I'm wondering, Reb, if you have any links or places where people can follow you, if they have any announcements of anything you're publishing, what will you be doing in your retirement?
Well, I've had a furious poetry writing year, which I think probably concluded 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think I need a little breather. And lo and behold, if something else hasn't cropped up, I have. There's a wonderful fitness and aquatic center here, and I've gotten really involved with water aerobics. Talk about change of subject here. Actually, if I have do I have a couple of minutes?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, the water aerobics is not the theme of the show, but
no,
I just want to know where people can follow you.
Well, I've been asked to be an instructor there. And so I've already taught one class. I'm going to be doing it more, and it's an hour-long water aerobics class to music. And so I have to construct playlists on Spotify around themes, musical themes, and you have to divide those up into the segments of the class. Well, it seems to me that this music really reaches people, and that maybe identity is coming to the surface when they hear these songs that are really deep to them or that they grew up with. And believe me, I'm conscious when I choose songs of how it's almost as if they're in dialogue with each other. If the theme is the days of the week or departures and arrivals, that can stir deep longings, okay? And so I'm finding that even this is an outlet. I think there can be a lot of good outlets for the work that we have to do. And I think that starting in our own communities, since we can't seem to affect anything on the national stage, then I defunded the mid-sized horrific city that I was living in last year and moved to it's about as close to a Whitopia as I could find. And there's a very strong sense of community here. And our group it goes out together. We went to Oktoberfest together. We go out to lunch together. Those are strong bonds, and we're going to need those bonds. We're going to need to form a common defense.
Yeah.
And so I take this work seriously, and there's so little we can do on a national level, and anything that we can do closer to home. Didn't Confucius have some notion of there's an image of concentric circles, the different communities that we're in, that kind of thing. So that's one way to think about it too. And these people like Robert Bly, by the way, to go back to that, also look to Asia, look to Japanese and Chinese poets. So there is an effort, there's an awareness in the poetry community itself for translation. Okay, that's I think it's really important. Something I'd like to do more of. So that's what I've been doing with myself, is the water aerobics business, where some interesting things have surfaced, I think.
Okay.
Play some White Art Collective music.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Very, very good. Very good. Yeah, my music is on my YouTube channel, actually.
Yeah.
And check that out. And are you on any social media, or should
I'm
we just...
afraid that I'm not.
Okay. Well, we check back with us in some time when you've published, or you want to talk more about your poetry. We would love to have you.
That'd be great.
Awesome. And once again, everybody in the audience, November 7th, 2021, Reb will be on Conversations with the Wind with Nullis and your other guest.
Yes,
it's going to be probably phenomenal. I mean, you guys will really be able to open up and go more deep into the craft of poetry, which I'm extremely excited about. I write poetry as well, lyrics for songs, etc. So I'm just going to bring my notepad and learn a lot. And so
I'm honored to have the best guests for this topic I could have ever have wished
for.
Oh
gosh. Come on now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to the audience for joining us today and your comments. Of course, thank you, Nullis, for helping out on the show, co-hosting. And Reb, thank you again for coming and being with us for this hour.
It was delightful.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, everybody, have yourself a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time on American Zarathustra.